Welcome back to 1834 for the very last time. If you've got this far, you will have watched all of the previous 89 videos in this series covering 6 matches, 85 games from beginning to end, and you'll know the final scores, and you will have prepared a handy chart just like I have, showing the 6 matches and the game totals at the end of that. There were 85 games played altogether, 45 were won by Le Bourdonnais, 27 by McDonnell, and there were 13 draws. But you will also remember that in the 6th and last match, something odd was going on. So after watching this video, you will be able to explain to all the ladies at the bar and the library exactly why McDonnell played as white 3 times out of the last 9 games in 1834. My demographics need all of the help that they can get. These young chaps, good luck to you, even bigger luck to these guys. Just don't forget to wash before you go out, because that helps. So let's get on with the video and introduce the cast of characters. Firstly, we of course have McDonnell and Le Bourdonnais, our 2 competitors, but we also have a Mr. William Greenwood Walker. Now, he was a big fan of McDonnell's, and he sat down next to him writing down all of the games as they happened so that we could enjoy them almost 200 years into the future. So thank you to him. I think he did a great job. I don't have any pictures or drawings or paintings or even photographs of the man, but I think this is what he must have looked like. Now, after Le Bourdonnais hurried away back to France on unspecified urgent business, Mr. Walker handed over his documents to our next character, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis was a publisher of chess books, and he took the documents, compiled them together, and put out a book in 1835 called A Selection of Games Played at the Westminster Chess Club. But he only included his favourite 50 games and left the rest out, so the collection was incomplete. Our next character is Mr. George Walker, who was actually present during the games as they were played, so he knows something about what he's talking about. After Mr. Lewis's book came out, Mr. Walker published an article that said it's a shame that the full 88 games were not published, and he also gives a different score for the totals. He says that Le Bourdonnais won 44, McDonnell won 30, and there were 14 draws. And he also published a book in the same year, A Selection of Games of Chess actually played by Philidor and his contemporaries, where he adds that of the last 12 games, McDonnell won 8, so that gives a different perspective of the last match. And the chap keeps repeating similar information over the next few years. Sometimes he says that McDonnell won 8 of the last 11 games. But meanwhile, while this was going on, McDonnell was sadly suffering from a disease of the kidneys, which got worse during the summer of 1835, and he finally succumbed and passed away on the 15th of September that year. Now, just as a reminder, there are no known portraits of McDonnell, so throughout I've been using another famous Irishman to stand in for him. He was buried in Kensal Green Cemetery, London. In 1836, across the Channel back in France, Le Bourdonnais was starting up the world's very first periodical fully devoted to chess, Le Palamède. You can see it over here. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, but there it is. But only a short while later, in 1838, he had a stroke, and eventually he was forced to sell off all of his possessions, including his clothes, to try to satisfy his creditors. However, it seems by 1840, our very own Mr. George Walker was helping out Le Bourdonnais. Le Bourdonnais had made the trip across the Channel back to London and was trying to play some chess games to make some coins, but he was actually penniless by this time and needed all the help that he could get. Unfortunately, he gave up the ghost on the 13th of December 1840, and Mr. Walker arranged for him to be buried in the very same cemetery as McDonnell. Here is a photograph of both of the graves that was published back in 1921. And at some point before he was buried, an actual death mask was taken of him, which is quite sinister but also extremely cool and interesting. And apparently the famous portrait that we have of Le Bourdonnais was drawn from this mask, not from the man while he was alive. So that's also very interesting. But I've been using the comedian Zero Mostel to represent Le Bourdonnais, as I think it fits his character well. Now, by 1844, Mr. George Walker had managed to get copies of most of the missing games, either from Mr. Lewis or directly from Mr. William Greenwood Walker himself, and he published them all in his book called Chess Studies. In this book, the first 5 matches are present and correct, as we went through in this video series, but he only gives 9 games for the 6th match, which again is the same as the ones we went through in this video series. I prepared this chart showing the thumbnails for easy reference, and who was white, who was black, what openings there were, and what the scores were as the games went on. But this is a problem, because we know that there should be 88 games, not the 85, So there are 3 games missing here. And additional to this, Mr. George Walker said that Le Bourdonnais won 44 games in total, McDonnell won 30, and there were 14 draws. So to make all of this work, the counts for the last 6th match need to be 6 wins to McDonnell, 3 wins to Le Bourdonnais, and 1 draw. So yes, that's very interesting indeed. So this corresponds precisely with Mr. Walker's statements that McDonnell won 8 of the last 11 or 12 games, either including or excluding the draw. But in the 9 games that we went through, we had Le Bourdonnais winning 4, which of course we now know is impossible. So it seems that Mr. Walker's documents for the last match must have been disarranged, and one of the games was incorrectly given to Le Bourdonnais instead of McDonnell. So which of the 4 wins was given to Le Bourdonnais might have been the one that should have been given to McDonnell. Now the first game here that was won by Le Bourdonnais was the Queen's Gambit Accepted, game number 2. I've got the moves lined up here with Le Bourdonnais as white, and let's just play the first few moves. Well, okay, we know McDonnell was a gentleman and he would always accept the gambit when it was offered, so this does look like McDonnell behaviour. He was always a gentleman and took that gambited pawn. But the one time that McDonnell offered the gambit to Le Bourdonnais in match 3, game number 4, everyone was outraged when Le Bourdonnais declined. Very unseemly behaviour indeed. So that all seems consistent with the way the 2 men played their games. Let's go back to the chart and look at what else Le Bourdonnais allegedly won. He has game 3, game 4 and game 7, all Evans gambits. Let's take a closer look at 2 of these. I say let's look at 2 of the games because game number 3 and game number 7 were identical up to a certain point. So let's get that on the board. I'm just going to zoom through the moves quickly. This is Evans Gambit accepted, and then the bishop is chased back to b6 here. And from this point, Le Bourdonnais as white plays bishop to b2 in both games, and this is actually his second favourite move after d5. And very interestingly, McDonnell never played either of these moves in any game. So this is also very consistent with how the 2 players played. Let's go back to the last remaining game that Le Bourdonnais allegedly won. That will be game number 4, a sticky situation. So let's get the game loaded up and let's go through it. Again, it gets up to move number 9, and that's when the bishop tucks back into b6 here. At this point, h3 was played, and Le Bourdonnais never played h3 on move 9 in any other game, whereas McDonnell has done 4 times in match 5 game number 1, match 5 game number 2, match 5 game number 8 and match 6 game number 7. Now I can go further with this. Some people have done some computer analysis, which I'll link to down below, in order to predict whether the play in this game, trained on the data from the other match 6 games, ought to result in this game being classified as Le Bourdonnais versus McDonnell or McDonnell versus Le Bourdonnais. And in fact, it came up with a 55.7% chance that McDonnell was white. I'll just quickly flip through the computer graphs that show this. Each one represents one of the games that it was trained on in match 6. And the very final one is that game number 4, where it estimates that it should have been McDonnell as white with a 55.7% probability. So that is super interesting. So let's go back to our match 6 chart, and we can now confidently flip game number 4 in McDonnell's favour, and it will be very interesting to go back and rewatch game number 4 on this channel with this new information at hand. So what next? Well, in the normal order of things, the players would swap colours after each win, but given that one game was misattributed, it is quite probable that the games in this match were not given in the correct sequence. However, we can have a go at rearranging them to a possible fit to all of the facts. Given that McDonnell played so few as white, we can assume that he played as white in the 3 missing games. One needs to be a draw, so I'm going to show you one possible rearrangement. So here we are. I've put the draw at the start and then a missing game after that where McDonnell played both as white, so he retained the same colours after the draw. Then we have one with Le Bourdonnais as white and another missing game here. So McDonnell here has won 8 out of the last 11 games, as well as 8 out of the last 12 games, including the draw, and the colour assignments all make sense as they switch between each victory corresponding to each game. Now, after all of that, let's put the cat amongst the pigeons. In Le Palamade, Le Bourdonnais' chess periodical, he started in 1836, Le Bourdonnais himself says that he played a total of 100 games, not 88, but they weren't all match games, and he even attempted to give McDonnell odds, that is, removing one or more of his own pieces from the board before starting the game. And finally, Saint-Amand, another French chess master, says that Le Bourdonnais once told him that he deliberately let McDonnell win some of the games in the last match. So take that with a pinch of salt. I personally prefer to believe that McDonnell won fair and square and they both behaved like gentlemen. Thank you for joining me on this epic journey, and I'll be back for some other, perhaps Shatranj related videos soon. I'll see you then.